The first time she told me I wasn't allowed to touch the stove, I laughed because I thought she was joking. I was standing in my son's kitchen, the smell of onions just beginning to soften in the pan, when her voice cut through the room. Calm, polite. Sharp in a way that didn't need to be loud. "Oh, please don't cook," she said. "I like to keep things a certain way." For a moment I didn't understand what she meant. My hand froze around the wooden spoon. The oil crackled softly like it was waiting for me to continue. I looked at her, then at my son, who was scrolling on his phone at the counter, not looking up. "I was just making his favorite," I said, smiling, still unsure if this was some kind of misunderstanding. "You know, lentils the way he likes them, with the cumin first, not last." She smiled back, tight, controlled. "I know how he likes his food," she replied, "and I prefer to cook in my own kitchen." Her kitchen. That was the first time I felt it, that small, almost invisible shift. Like a chair being pulled out from under you slowly so you don't fall, but you never quite feel balanced again. I turned off the stove without another word. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. The spoon rested on the counter, still warm. I washed my hands, dried them carefully, and sat down at the table like a guest waiting to be served. No one said anything. The clock above the fridge ticked, steady and indifferent. That was how it began. Before all of this, my life had been simple, not easy, but honest. I was a widow by the time my son got married, already used to quiet mornings and long evenings. My husband had been gone 5 years when my son Arav brought her home for the first time. Neha. She was beautiful in a careful way, always neat, always composed. The kind of woman who never seemed rushed, even when she was busy. She spoke softly, chose her words like she was arranging furniture, everything in its proper place. I remember the first meal I cooked for them after the wedding. It was in my own home then. I spent the entire afternoon preparing, grinding spices by hand, tasting, adjusting, tasting again, the way my mother taught me. The way food was never just food in our family, it was memory, love, apology, celebration. Neha complimented the dishes politely, thanked me, she didn't ask for seconds. Arav, though, ate like he always had, hungry, relaxed, comforted. He leaned back in his chair afterward and said, "Ma, no one cooks like you." I saw her smile tighten then, just for a second. I told myself I imagined it. After they moved into their new apartment, I visited once a week, sometimes twice. I didn't want to hover. I remembered how it felt to be newly married, trying to find your footing, trying to build something that was just yours. So I brought fruit, desserts, sometimes groceries. I folded laundry when Neha was tired. I watched quietly as she arranged her cupboards, labeled jars, reorganized shelves. Everything had a system. At first, the rules were small. Shoes had to be placed a certain way, towels folded a certain way, the living room cushions couldn't be moved once they were set. "These are just habits," Arav said once, laughing lightly when I mentioned it. "You know how Neha is, she likes order." I nodded. I understood order. I had run a household for decades. But there is a difference between order and control, and I was slowly learning the shape of that difference. The kitchen became the border. At first, she would hover when I cooked, correct small things, suggest alternatives. "Oh, I usually add salt later. I think the flame is too high. We don't really eat this anymore." Each comment was gentle, reasonable, hard to object to without sounding sensitive, so I adjusted. I stepped back, I asked before touching anything. Then one afternoon I arrived early. Neha was still at work. Arav was on a call in the bedroom. The fridge was nearly empty. I decided to cook something warm for when they got home, something comforting. I had just started when she walked in unexpectedly. That was the moment. The sentence, the smile, "Please don't cook." After that day, the rules hardened. "You don't need to help in the kitchen. It's easier if I do it myself. I get anxious when others cook here." She said it like a confession, like a vulnerability I was supposed to respect, so I did. I sat, I waited. I offered help that was declined. I washed dishes only when invited. Slowly, without anyone saying it outright, I stopped belonging in that space. And what hurt most was not the food, it was what the food represented. In my life, cooking had always been how I showed care. When words failed me, I fed people. When I was worried, I cooked. When I missed my husband, I cooked the dishes he loved and pretended just for a moment that he might walk into the kitchen. Now, in my son's home, that language had been taken from me. Arav noticed something was off, but not enough to name it. "You seem quiet these days, Ma," he said once as he walked me to the door. "I'm fine," I told him, and I believed it, or I wanted to. Because at that point I still thought this was about preferences, about space, about a young woman finding her footing as a wife. I didn't yet understand that this wasn't about cooking at all. It was about who held power in that house, and who didn't. After that day, I began arriving later. Not on purpose, at least that's what I told myself. But the truth was, I started calculating my visits the way one measures steps on thin ice. I would wait until Neha texted, "We're home," instead of coming early like I used to. I'd bring packaged sweets instead of ingredients, things that didn't require permission. The kitchen door remained closed to me even when it was wide open. When I sat in the living room, I could hear Neha moving inside, chopping, rinsing, the rhythmic tap of a knife against the board. Familiar sounds that used to feel like home now felt like distance. I kept my hands folded in my lap, afraid that if I stood up, I might instinctively walk in and cross another invisible line. Once I did stand. It was a small thing. The kettle was whistling, sharp and impatient. Arav was in the shower. Neha was on a call in the bedroom. The sound pierced my head, and without thinking, I walked into the kitchen and turned the stove off. That was all. When Neha came out and saw me there, her face didn't change, but the air did. "I was going to take care of that," she said. "I just turned it off," I replied softly. "It was boiling too much." She nodded slowly. "I know. But I like to do things myself." There it was again, that careful sentence. Calm, polite, final. I stepped back like a child caught somewhere they shouldn't be. I smiled, apologized, and returned to my seat. But inside, something tightened, not anger yet, something closer to grief. I began to notice patterns. Whenever relatives visited, Neha transformed. She asked me to sit beside her. She praised me in front of others. "She's such a caring mother," she'd say, placing a hand lightly on my arm. "I'm lucky." I smiled when she said it. What else could I do? But the moment the door closed behind the guests, the warmth disappeared. She would gather plates quickly, usher me out of the kitchen, reclaim the space like territory that had been temporarily lent out. Once, my sister noticed. "Why are you sitting like a guest in your own son's house?" she whispered when Neha went to the balcony to take a call. I laughed it off. "Times have changed," I said. "Girls run households differently now." But that night, lying awake in my own bed, her words echoed, "Your own son's house." The phrase felt heavier than it should have. Arav, for his part, lived in the space between. He loved us both. I never doubted that. But love, I was learning, does not always mean awareness. He saw the surface, peace, order, no raised voices. What he didn't see were the negotiations happening quietly underneath. One evening, I gathered the courage to speak to him. We were alone in the living room. Neha was at the gym. The fan hummed above us, slicing the air. "Arav," I said carefully, "have I done something to upset Neha?" He looked up, surprised. "No, Ma, why would you think that?" "I feel like I'm always in the way," I said. The words felt clumsy, inadequate. "Especially in the kitchen." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Ma, you know how she is. She's particular. It's not personal." "But it feels personal," I replied. He smiled gently. "You're overthinking. She just likes control over her space. You've always been independent. You don't need to prove anything." Prove? I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was trying to belong. I let the conversation drop. I had raised my concern. That should have been enough. I didn't want to become that mother, the one accused of interfering, of creating drama where none existed, so I adjusted again. I stayed quieter, shorter visits, fewer opinions. I learned to ask before opening drawers. I learned to keep my hands busy with my purse, my phone, my scarf, anything but the counters and stoves I had once ruled with ease. And then came the lunch. It was Arav's birthday. Nothing big, just the three of us. Neha had planned the menu days in advance. She told me over the phone, listing dishes like a schedule. "You don't need to bring anything," she said. "Just come and enjoy." I arrived with a small box of sweets anyway. Old habits die slowly. The table was set beautifully, everything matched, even the napkins. I sat where she pointed. Arav smiled, happy, unaware of the tension tightening my chest. As Neha served the food, I watched Arav take his first bite. His face softened the way it always did when he tasted something that felt like home. "This is good," he said. She smiled brightly. "I followed your favorite recipe." I nodded, took my own bite, and felt something unexpected: confusion. The dish was almost right, almost. But the cumin was added too late. The lentils weren't cooked long enough. The flavor stopped short of warmth. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't his favorite. I said nothing. But later, when Arav went to wash his hands, Neha leaned toward me and said quietly, I hope you don't mind that I cook everything now. It's important to me. Important. That word landed hard. I don't mind, I replied because that was what peace sounded like. She studied me for a moment as if measuring whether I meant it. Then she smiled, satisfied, and stood to clear the plates. That night, back in my own kitchen, I cooked the same dish. Slowly, carefully, I tasted as I went. The spices bloomed the way they always had. The aroma filled the room, thick with memory. I ate alone. And for the first time, I allowed myself to ask a question I had been avoiding. What happens when kindness is mistaken for surrender? Because something had shifted again, not just in her rules, but in her confidence. She no longer asked, she informed, she no longer suggested. She decided, and the more I stepped back, the more space she seemed to take. The kitchen had been the beginning, but it was no longer the only place I was being erased. The first time she corrected me in front of someone else, I felt my face burn before my mind caught up. We were hosting a small gathering, nothing formal. Arav's colleague and his wife had stopped by unexpectedly one Sunday afternoon. Neha moved into hostess mode immediately, graceful and efficient, pulling out snacks, setting glasses, adjusting cushions like she was staging a photograph. I stood up instinctively, old reflex. Hospitality lived in my bones. I'll make some tea, I said, already turning toward the kitchen. Neha's hand touched my arm, light, almost affectionate, but firm enough to stop me. Oh no, she said with a smile meant for everyone in the room. Please sit, I've got it. There was a pause, just a second too long. Her friend looked from her to me, then away. Arav shifted in his seat. I smiled and sat back down, feeling smaller than I had any right to feel. The conversation resumed, but something inside me went quiet, not wounded, numb. As Neha prepared the tea, I could hear her explaining her choices from the kitchen. I don't add sugar directly, she said loudly. Everyone prefers it differently. That wasn't new, I knew that, but the way she said it, like a lesson being delivered, made my hands curl into my lap. After the guests left, I helped clear the table, carefully, silently. You don't need to do that, Neha said, taking a plate from my hand. You should rest. I wasn't tired. That night I cried in my bathroom, quietly. The kind of crying that doesn't come with sobs, just tears slipping down while you stare at yourself in the mirror, trying to recognize when dignity began to feel like defeat. I told myself I was being sensitive, that this was generational, that times had changed. Young women wanted autonomy, space, control over their environment. But deep down, another thought kept rising, unwelcome and persistent. Why does her autonomy require my disappearance? I began replaying moments in my head, conversations, glances, corrections disguised as concern. You shouldn't lift heavy things. That's outdated thinking. We don't do it that way anymore. Each sentence, polite on its own, formed a pattern when placed together. One afternoon, I arrived to find Neha reorganizing the pantry. All the jars I had once labeled rice, lentils, flour were gone, replaced with new ones. Uniform, minimal, sterile. I hope you don't mind, she said without looking at me. I threw away the old labels. They were confusing my handwriting, my system, my presence. I nodded even though my chest felt tight. Of course, she smiled. It's just easier this way. Easier for whom, I wondered. Later that week, Arav called me. Ma, Neha said you seemed upset the other day, he said gently. Did something happen? I closed my eyes. She told you that? I asked. She was worried, he replied. She doesn't want you to feel uncomfortable. Uncomfortable, that word again, as if discomfort was an accident, not a result. I'm fine, I said automatically. Then, surprising myself, I added, but I feel like I don't have a place in your home anymore. There was silence on the other end. Ma, he began, then stopped. You always have a place, don't think like that. But do I asked softly, or do I just visit? He didn't answer right away. You're reading too much into it, he said finally. She just likes things a certain way. That sentence again. The same one repeated like a shield. After we hung up, I sat for a long time staring at my phone. I wasn't angry at him, I knew his position. He was balancing, managing, trying to keep peace. But peace built on silence is fragile. The real turning point came on a rainy evening. Neha had called me earlier that day. Can you come over tomorrow? She asked. I need to talk to you. Her tone was calm, polite as always, but something about it made my stomach tight. When I arrived, she was already seated at the dining table. No tea, no small talk. She gestured for me to sit. I want to be honest with you, she said. I've been feeling a little overwhelmed. I nodded, waiting. I grew up in a house where boundaries were very strict, she continued. I need to feel in control of my environment to function well. I listened, I really did. And sometimes, she added, looking directly at me now, when you take initiative, especially in the kitchen, it makes me anxious. Anxious, I folded my hands together. I didn't realize, I said quietly, that was never my intention. I know, she replied quickly, and I appreciate your understanding. That's why I think it's best if you don't cook here at all or reorganize things. Or manage the house in any way. Manage? I don't manage, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I help. She smiled thin. Help can feel like control. The irony almost took my breath away. So, she continued, this way we avoid misunderstandings. Everyone stays comfortable. Everyone, except me. I looked at her then, really looked, not as my son's wife, not as a young woman navigating marriage, but as someone who needed to establish dominance without ever raising her voice. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't about anxiety, it wasn't about boundaries. It was about making sure I knew where I stood. I nodded slowly. If that's what you need, I said, her shoulders relaxed visibly. Thank you, she said. I knew you'd understand. When I left that evening, the rain had turned the street slick and reflective. My footsteps echoed louder than usual. I didn't cry. I felt something else instead. Clarity, because the truth had finally stepped out of the shadows, dressed in polite words and gentle smiles. She didn't want partnership. She wanted authority. And I had been handing it to her piece by piece in the name of peace. But peace, I was learning, should never cost you your voice. I didn't tell anyone about that conversation right away. Not Arav, not my sister. Not even my closest friend who knew every quiet corner of my life. I carried it alone, turning Neha's words over and over in my mind like stones in my pocket, small, but heavy enough to pull me down. Help can feel like control. The sentence echoed in moments it had no business being in, when I folded my own laundry, when I watered my plants, when I stirred a pot in my own kitchen. I began to question myself in places no one else had ever questioned me. That, I realized later, was the most dangerous part. For a while I did exactly what she asked. I visited less. When I did come, I stayed seated. I praised her cooking enthusiastically, even when it tasted unfamiliar. I asked permission before doing things that once came naturally, opening a window, wiping a spill, adjusting a chair. Neha noticed. Of course she did. She became warmer, kinder. She invited me more often, told Arav how understanding I was. And that's when something inside me finally broke, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet resolve that surprised even me. Because I saw it clearly now, the more I disappeared, the more pleasant she became. That wasn't compromise, that was conditioning. The breaking point came unexpectedly on a day that should have been ordinary. Arav had fallen sick with a bad fever. Neha called me early in the morning. He's not feeling well, she said. Could you come by for a bit? Of course I went. I carried with me a bag of medicines and the instinctive knowledge of what my son needed when he was unwell. I had cared for him through childhood illnesses, teenage fevers, heartbreaks that looked like colds and colds that felt like heartbreaks. When I arrived, he was lying on the couch, eyes dull, skin warm. "Ma," he murmured when he saw me. "I feel terrible." I touched his forehead, too warm. "I'll make you some soup," I said automatically, already moving toward the kitchen. Neha stood up quickly. "I'll do it," she said. "A simple broth," I replied. "He needs something light, I know what helps him." She hesitated just for a second. "I've already planned his meals," she said. "You can sit with him." Planned, I looked at my son. His eyes flicked between us, uncomfortable. "Let Ma make it," he said weakly. "I like her soup when I'm sick." The room went still. Neha's jaw tightened just slightly. "I'll make it," she repeated, firmer now. "You should rest." I felt something rise in me then, not anger exactly, but something older, protective, unyielding. "He asked for me," I said quietly. She looked at me, really looked. And in that moment the mask slipped. "This is my house," she said, her voice low, controlled. "And I've asked you not to cook here." Arav tried to sit up. "Neha, I'm not discussing this," she said, not looking at him. "I need consistency." Consistency, I took a slow breath. "I am his mother," I said, "and he is sick. I'm not trying to take over your home, I'm trying to care for my child." Her eyes flashed. "And I am his wife," she replied, "and I decide how things run here." The words hung between us, sharp and undeniable. Arav closed his eyes. I realized then that this was no longer about soup, or kitchens, or rules. It was a power struggle and she had chosen her moment carefully. I turned to my son. I'm going to step out for a moment, I said gently. Rest. He looked at me, confusion and guilt clouding his face. Ma, I squeezed his hand and walked out onto the balcony, my heart pounding louder than the traffic below. From there, I could hear them arguing in hushed tones. Neha's voice controlled, insistent. Arav's tired, torn. I didn't listen closely. I didn't need to. I knew what was happening. She was framing me as interference, as stress, as a problem that needed managing. And I understood something crucial in that moment. If I stayed silent now, I wouldn't just lose the kitchen. I would lose my son's trust in my intentions. When Arav came out to the balcony a few minutes later, he looked exhausted. She's just stressed, he said. You know how she gets. I looked at him, really looked at the man I raised, kind, loving, conflict avoidant. Arav, I said softly, when did caring become interference? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I don't want to fight, he said finally. Neither do I replied, but I won't shrink myself to keep the peace. He frowned. What does that mean? It means, I said, choosing my words carefully, that I won't be treated like a guest when I'm trying to be a mother. He was quiet for a long time. I'll talk to her, he said eventually. I nodded. Please do. That evening, I went home and cooked the soup anyway. I poured it into a container and left it at their door later without knocking. No note, no apology, just nourishment. The next day, Neha didn't call. The day after that, Arav did. We need to talk, he said. And I knew as I set down the phone that the quiet part of this story was ending. The truth, long avoided, carefully wrapped in politeness, was finally demanding to be seen. We met 3 days later, not at their apartment. Neha suggested a cafe, neutral ground, she said. Somewhere public, calm, controlled. I agreed because by then I understood how much settings mattered to her. She arrived first. Arav and I walked in together. The cafe smelled like burnt coffee and sugar, too loud, too bright. I would have preferred my own kitchen table where truths had always been spoken softly and honestly, but this was her terrain now. Neha smiled when she saw me, a public smile, polished. I'm glad we're doing this, she said, folding her hands neatly on the table. Communication is important. I nodded. Arav ordered tea for all of us without asking, muscle memory from a life before negotiations. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Neha cleared her throat. I feel like there's been a misunderstanding, she began. I've never wanted you to feel unwelcome. I waited. But I do feel that sometimes, she continued. There are expectations placed on me about how a wife should run her home, about food, traditions. I kept my voice steady. I have never told you how to run your home. You don't have to, she replied quickly. Presence can carry expectations. Presence, I almost smiled at the irony. So what are you saying? I asked. She hesitated, choosing words like stepping stones. I'm saying I need autonomy. I need to feel like this is my space, not an extension of yours. Arav shifted beside me. Neha, Ma isn't trying to, she raised a hand gently. Let me finish. That small gesture, so subtle, said everything. I watched my son fall silent. And I think, she said, turning back to me, it would be healthier if boundaries were clearer for all of us. There it was again, that word, healthy, as if discomfort could be disguised as care. I took a sip of tea. It was too hot. I welcomed the sting. Neha, I said calmly, when you set boundaries, they seem to apply only in one direction. She blinked. What do you mean? I don't cook, I don't organize, I don't help unless invited, I said. But you comment on how I live, what I eat, how often I call my son. That's concern, she said, not control. I nodded. That's what I've been told too. Arav looked between us. Can we slow down? He asked. This feels intense. It's intense because it's been unspoken, I replied, not taking my eyes off Neha. I've been quiet for months, you're just hearing it now. She straightened. I didn't realize you felt this way. I believed her and I didn't. Let me ask you something, I said. If I were your mother, would these rules be the same? The question hung there unanswered. That's not fair, she said finally. Neither is being erased politely, I replied. Her expression hardened just slightly. I think, she said slowly, you're used to a certain level of involvement, and when that changes, it feels like loss. It did feel like loss, but not the way she meant. I'm not grieving control, I said. I'm grieving connection. Arav's eyes filled then. He looked down at the table. Neha exhaled sharply. I can't be responsible for how you feel, she said. I can only manage my environment. And I can't pretend your environment doesn't include people, I replied. The conversation circled like that for a while, calm voices, sharp edges, no shouting. No accusations that could be easily dismissed, just truth placed carefully on the table piece by piece. Finally, Neha leaned back. So what do you want? She asked. It was the first time anyone had asked me that directly. I thought for a moment. I want respect, I said. Not authority, not control, just respect. She nodded slowly. Respect goes both ways. Yes, I agreed. And it includes acknowledging that love sometimes looks like soup made by a mother, not a threat to a marriage. Arav reached for my hand then. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Neha looked at our joined hands and something flickered in her eyes, surprise maybe, or fear. I don't want competition, she said quietly. I don't want competition either, I replied. I want coexistence. The waiter came by to clear the table, breaking the tension. When he left, Neha spoke again. I need time, she said. I nodded. Take it. We stood to leave. Outside, the air felt cooler, clearer. As we walked to the car, Arav lagged behind. Ma, he said softly, I should have noticed sooner. I squeezed his arm. You noticed when it mattered. That night I didn't feel victorious or defeated. I felt visible, but visibility has consequences. Because once truths are spoken aloud, they don't retreat quietly. They demand change. And change, I was about to learn, rarely happens without resistance. Change didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments, uneven, awkward, and fragile, like learning to walk again after a long illness. For a few weeks after the cafe conversation, Neha kept her distance. She didn't call, she didn't invite me over. Arav came alone, usually in the evenings after work, carrying with him a quiet heaviness that settled into my living room. She's thinking, he said once when I asked how things were at home. I nodded. Thinking could mean many things. During that time, I focused on my own routines. Morning walks, reading, cooking meals I no longer rushed through. I reminded myself that I had lived a full life before becoming a mother-in-law and that I would continue to live one regardless of how this situation resolved. Still, I missed my son, and I knew she knew that too. The next invitation came unexpectedly. Neha called one afternoon. Her voice was measured, softer than usual. We're having a small dinner on Sunday, she said. Just us, if you'd like to come. I agreed. When I arrived, the apartment looked the same, but something in the air had shifted. Less rigid, less guarded, Neha greeted me politely. Arav hugged me longer than usual. Dinner was already prepared. I didn't offer to help. I didn't comment on the food. I followed the new rules because, for now, I wanted to observe. Halfway through the meal, Neha spoke. I've been thinking about what you said, she said, looking at her plate. About connection. I waited. I don't always know how to share space, she continued. In my family, love was conditional. You earned it by doing things right. I listened carefully. This was the most she had ever revealed. And when you came in so naturally, she added, it made me feel like I was failing, like I wasn't enough. The confession caught me off guard. I never wanted you to feel that way, I said gently. I know, she replied, but feelings aren't always logical. Arav reached for her hand. She let him. I still need boundaries, she said, but I also see now that I used them like walls. Walls. Yes, I said quietly. That's how they felt. There was a pause. I'm not ready to change everything, she admitted, but I'm willing to try small things. I nodded. Small things were how big changes began. Next time, she said, hesitating, maybe we could cook together one dish. The invitation felt tentative, almost fragile. I'd like that, I replied. That night I went home cautiously hopeful, but growth is rarely linear. The next weekend when I arrived to cook that one agreed-upon dish, I sensed tension immediately. Neha hovered, correcting measurements, adjusting flames. Old habits resurfaced quickly. This is too much oil, she said. Let me do that part. I usually cut it thinner. I stopped. I set the knife down and looked at her. Neha, I said calmly, if you invited me to cook, you have to let me cook. Her shoulders stiffened. I'm just trying to help. I met her gaze. Help can feel like control. The words landed between us, mirrored back to her. Arav, watching from the doorway, exhaled slowly. Neha stepped back. You're right, she said after a moment. I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. The dish turned out fine. Not exceptional, not terrible, just fine, and that was enough. Over the next few weeks, similar moments played out. Progress followed by retreat, apologies followed by defensiveness. But something fundamental had shifted. The struggle was no longer invisible. Family gatherings changed too. At a cousin's anniversary dinner, someone joked, "So who's the real boss of the kitchen now?" The table went quiet. Neha smiled, but there was tension in it. "We share," she said carefully. I didn't contradict her. I didn't need to. Because later that evening, when someone asked me for a recipe, Neha didn't interrupt. She didn't correct. She listened. That was the public consequence, not humiliation, not confrontation, but exposure. People began to see the dynamic for what it was, not because I announced it, but because I stopped hiding it. Respect grows in the light. One evening, RF came to see me alone. "I didn't understand power before," he said, sitting across from me. "I thought if no one was yelling, everything was fine." I smiled sadly. Silence can be louder than shouting. "I'm trying to do better," he said. "I see that," I replied. He hesitated. "She's afraid of losing me." I nodded. "So was I." He looked up, surprised. "That's the difference," I continued. "I learned that loving you meant letting you go. She's still learning that loving you doesn't mean owning everything around you." That night, when I lay in bed, I felt something close to peace, not because everything was fixed, but because nothing was hidden anymore. The power struggle had been named. And once named, it could no longer pretend to be something else. Healing doesn't announce itself. It slips in quietly, disguised as ordinary moments you don't recognize as victories until much later. The first sign came on a weekday afternoon, when Neha called me without a reason. "I'm at the market," she said. "Arav's working late. Do you need anything?" The question was simple, casual, but it landed differently. "No," I replied after a second. "Thank you for asking." She hesitated, then added, "I'm thinking of making soup tonight." "Do you still add ginger at the end?" I closed my eyes. "Yes," I said, "just a little. It keeps the warmth." "Okay," she said, "I'll try that." After the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. She hadn't asked for permission. She had asked for knowledge. That was new. From there, things softened, not dramatically, not perfectly, but honestly. I was still careful. She was still particular, but we began navigating each other instead of competing. She invited my opinions without obligation. I offered help without insistence. Arav noticed the shift before either of us acknowledged it. "You both sound lighter," he said once, half joking. We didn't respond. We didn't need to. The real test came during Diwali. Traditionally, I hosted. Every year, even after my husband passed, the rituals anchored me, the lights, the sweets. The familiarity of it all. This year, Neha called me 2 weeks before the festival. "I was thinking," she said slowly, "maybe we could do it together at your place." I held the phone tightly. "At my place?" I repeated. "Yes," she said. "I've never done it the traditional way. I'd like to learn." "Learn, not manage, not oversee, learn," I agreed. On the day of Diwali, my house filled with movement again. The kind that doesn't feel intrusive, just alive. Neha arrived early. She didn't reorganize. She asked questions. "Is this how you arrange the lamps? Why do you light this one first? What does this prayer mean?" I answered patiently, gratefully. At one point, I stepped away to take a call. When I returned, I found Neha in my kitchen, stirring a pot. For a split second, instinct rose in me, old fear, old habits. Then she looked up and said, "I hope you don't mind. I didn't want it to burn." I smiled. "Thank you," I said. That night, as we sat together, Arav watched us with something like relief, not triumph, relief. Later, after everyone left, Neha stayed behind to help clean up. "You don't have to," I said. "I know," she replied. "I want to." As we washed dishes side by side, she spoke quietly. "I used control to feel safe," she said. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting you." I rinsed a plate slowly. "And I used silence to keep peace," I replied. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting myself." She nodded. "I don't want us to be like that." "Neither do I said. We didn't hug, not then. Some wounds don't need gestures, they need consistency. In the weeks that followed, boundaries found their proper shape. Not walls, not open fields, something in between. I cooked occasionally at their place, sometimes alone, sometimes with her. Other times I didn't, and that was okay. What mattered was that the choice was mutual now. One evening, I overheard Neha on the phone with a friend. "No, she's not interfering," she said. "She's just present." Present? The word filled me with a warmth I hadn't expected. But healing also meant letting go of illusions. Neha would never be me, and I would never be her. We would disagree again. We would misunderstand again. The difference was that now neither of us would pretend those tensions were kindness. The kitchen, once a battleground, became just a kitchen again. A place of smells and warmth and occasional mess. A place where power no longer mattered as much as people did. One night as I was leaving their apartment, Arav walked me to the door. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For staying," he replied. "Even when it hurt." I touched his cheek. "Mothers don't leave," I said. "They learn." As I walked down the stairs, I felt lighter, not because I had won, but because I hadn't lost myself. That, I realized, was the real resolution. Time has a way of softening sharp edges if we let it. Today, when I walk into my son's home, I don't measure my steps anymore. I don't count the rules in my head. I don't wonder whether my presence is welcome or merely tolerated. Some days I cook. Some days I don't, and neither feels like surrender. Neha still likes things orderly. I still believe warmth sometimes lives in a little mess. We haven't erased our differences. We've learned how to hold them without turning them into weapons. The kitchen no longer belongs to one of us. It belongs to the moment. Sometimes that moment smells like cumin blooming in oil. Sometimes it smells like food I didn't make at all. And that's okay. What I learned through all of this is something I wish someone had told me sooner. Silence does not always mean maturity. And peace should never require you to shrink. For a long time, I believed that love meant stepping back endlessly. That if I made myself small enough, quiet enough, agreeable enough, everything would stay calm. But calm is not the same as healthy. True respect doesn't come from obedience. It comes from honesty spoken gently but firmly. Neha wasn't a villain in my story. She was afraid of comparison, afraid of not being enough, afraid of losing the space she fought so hard to build. And I wasn't perfect either. I waited too long to speak. I mistook endurance for grace. I forgot that being a mother doesn't end when your child grows up, but it does change. What saved us wasn't confrontation alone, it was visibility. Once the truth was spoken, without shouting, without cruelty, it could finally breathe, and once it breathed, it could change shape. My son learned that love doesn't have to choose sides. My daughter-in-law learned that control isn't the same as safety. And I learned that dignity is not something you protect by staying quiet, it's something you protect by standing gently but firmly in your truth. If you're listening to this and you feel like a guest in a place where your heart once lived, I want you to know something. You are not wrong for wanting to belong. You are not selfish for wanting respect. And you are not dramatic for feeling hurt by small rules that slowly erase you. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do isn't walking away. It's staying without disappearing. So I'll ask you what I always ask at the end of my stories if you were in my place. Would you have stayed silent for peace? Or would you have spoken even if your voice shook? Tell me in the comments. I read them all. And if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own quiet battles, your own unspoken boundaries, consider subscribing or sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. You're not alone.